Thank you very much for having me. Zak Ford, author of Called Up, Ball Players Remember Becoming Major Leaguers. Happy to talk with you this evening. A little bit about me first. I'm chair of the Dusty Baker Sacramento SABR chapter, also involved with the Pacific Coast League Historical Society. That's always been something near and dear to my heart, the old Pacific Coast League before Major League Baseball arrived on the West Coast. My great uncle used to play in that league, so I have a connection to that. What would have interested me personally to start this book? My favorite baseball book since I was a kid was The Glory of Their Times. I discovered that when I was in junior high. And what was great about that is although a lot of the players in the book were nearly a century older than me, Ritter presented their stories in that first person narrative that really captured the feelings and emotions of being a baseball player at that time. And I think it's this. Yeah, there we go. We got two people there. And as a result, I've always been more interested. I've always had kind of gravitated to that first person narrative story like Ritter had created. So, as I would interview players when I was a kid, or I would like to kind of piece together those stories with the player voice as opposed to the author voice. I always thought that's definitely a superior way of capturing the feelings and emotions of any story, let alone it being a sports story or whatnot. So one of the reasons for that was Glory of Their Times. I think, like everybody that's ever picked up a baseball glove, I wanted to become a Major League Baseball player. I think that's a dream all of us had. However, I will disclose that I hit about 200 in Little League. So when you hit around 200 in Little League, I'm all for, going after your dreams and everything, but chances are you're probably going to have to choose a different avenue if you want to stay involved in baseball. So I got involved in sports writing. Um, and I alluded to it earlier about my great uncle being in the old Pacific Coast League, but he was also property of the Boston Red Sox for quite a while. And he was actually, after the war, he made the Red Sox out of spring training in 1946. So he was a phantom major leaguer, didn't get into a game. After about a few weeks, he was released. And then the same thing happened with the Boston Braves across town. And I always kind of wanted to have or wanted to capture his story or his experience in the big leagues. However, I knew that there was a sense of disappointment that he didn't actually get into a game during those few weeks he was on a big league roster. But here's a few photos, me looking very intimidating as a little leaguer. Me as a right-handed Will Clark for Halloween in 1989. And then this is a collage I put together with my uncle and myself, and then some of his time in Boston is centerpiece there. So about the book. The book is a collection of 109 first-person player stories. They're all original interviews, and what I did was I tried to capture the feelings and emotions of becoming a Major League Baseball player. Debut ranges are quite diverse. The first player in the book is Sudden Sam McDowell, who came up as a teenager with the 1961 Indians. The most recent debut is that of Patrick Wisdom, who is the active major leaguer in the book. He came up in 2018 with the St. Louis Cardinals. He's currently with the Chicago Cubs. Major League service time ranges from 2 days to over 2 decades. So I wasn't originally planning to include a phantom major leaguer, but I did end up with one phantom major leaguer in the book. His story was just too good not to include. And then on the flip end, I have Jerry Royce. We all know Jerry Royce. He spent 22 years pitching in the big league. So quite a diverse amount of major league experience as well. I debated internally kind of how to present the stories. Ultimately, I decided to do them by time frame. That way you could kind of see some common themes throughout, how people are getting in the news, that type of thing, what the orientation process is, kind of evolved over time. Nearly all teams are represented. I think when all was said and done, I didn't have releases from a player from the Diamondbacks or the Astros, but the other teams are represented, and typically by at least a few players. Now, I'll go a little bit. I'll go a little bit. Provide a little bit of detail about the time frame sections. Kind of give you an idea of what's impacting major league rosters at the time and call-ups. 60s and 70s, obviously decades of expansion. Go from 16 all the way to 26 teams. Definitely a lot of changes in a minor league structure. First amateur draft was held as well. There were some improvements as far as labor relations goes. There's free agency in the mid to late 70s, kind of changed some roster spots there. There are 17 players that made major league debuts in the 1960s or 1970s. 1980s, so there are some stories that were impacted by the 1981 strike. Some players that were on the cusp of getting called up, and then the strike happens, and then they have to wait around until that September call up, and they're kind of unsure what's going on. It's kind of an interesting dynamic in two or three of the stories in the book. Relief pitching, obviously been around since forever, but really in the 70s and 80s especially is when the role of relief pitching started to evolve and change, especially the role of closer. So teams started carrying more pitchers, and that obviously impacted how rosters were made up. For a few years in the 80s also, there was a cut from 25 to 24 players. So obviously that decreased the amount of players going up and down. 15 players from the 1980s. 1990s, another time of expansion, another time of some labor challenges. Some stories are impacted by both the lockout and the strike. Obviously, there were no call-ups per se, and at the end of the 1994 season, so some of the players in the book had to wait until the beginning of 1995. Also changes to the disabled list, which impacted the frequency of roster changes. So more players were going up and down. 42 players are in the book from the 1990s, definitely the highest amount of representation in the book. Since 2000, obviously statistical analysis has been around since before then, but really over the last 20 years, the last couple generations or so, there's been a larger influence of statistical analysis and more use of that when impacting or changing rosters. A lot of restructuring in minor leagues, more changes, even more changes to the injured list, where there's even more ups and downs impacting the frequency of player call-ups and roster moves. 35 players made their debut since 2000. And this is not limited to a particular time frame. Actually, obviously started prior to even Sam McDowell, which is the first story. But the rise in international talent has also obviously impacted major league rosters over the last few generations as well. Now, a little bit about the stories before I get into a few examples for you. Again, it's a collection of first-person human interest stories. So the goal was to capture what can't be obtained from reading a box score. If you want to get a detailed breakdown of the game, of a debut game, you go to Baseball Reference. I wanted to get, how those players felt when they were called into that locker room and told that they were going to achieve the dream that they had when they were 7 years old. I wanted to get that feeling. I wanted to get an idea of who they were calling afterwards. What were some of those conversations like with mom or dad or a girlfriend or a coach? And the first question I asked players was, when did you first realize you had the talent to become a Major League Baseball player? Now, I didn't ask this question because I was expecting them or wanting them to say when I was 18 years old or when I was 20 years old or when I was in double A. Now, some of the players alluded to that type of time frame, provided those types of ages, but I asked that question because I knew it would spark memories of when they were first kind of put it together. Who were some of the early mentors, coaches that they had that helped them along their journey to achieve that dream? And oftentimes, when they started talking about their debut, when they started talking about their call up, who was in the stands, some of those, the names or the people that they had talked about when they answered that first question reoccurred. And I did that strategically because I knew that it would spark those memories, um, and give a more complete story and picture for these folks' journeys. They've These stories have only been edited very minimally from the original transcripts. I'd interview a player. If I had follow-up question, then I'd obviously piece it around to where it's chronological. If a player said something like I went out and pitched 5 or 6 innings, or I had an at bat in the fourth or fifth inning, and I found out that it was, they were batting in the fifth or they were pitching in the sixth, I obviously made those types of corrections. But other than that, these are their words. So it will read like spoken word. There may be, there not maybe, there will be some grammar slips. So you may hear me and him instead of him and I, those types of things. Nothing drastic, but I did want folks to basically hear the stories as they're reading it. All right, so I'm going to get into a few sample stories here. I got a few stories that are, I got a Oriole sandwich, I guess you can say. A couple Orioles and then a national and then actually a Mariner in between. But I got four sample stories for you today. The first is a favorite of a lot of SABR folks, and that's Bobby Grich came up in with the 1990 Orioles. He was playing for the Rochester Red Wings at the time, and that team was extremely stacked. I guess the Orioles at the major league level were doing great at that time too, obviously. But he was having a great season. I want to say he was somewhere around like 380. I think he was even batting. I can't remember if he was batting before or after Don Baylor. They just had an incredible Rochester Red Wings team before before his call up. Cal Ripken Sr. is actually the one that calls him into the office to tell him what the situation is, that he's going to be going up to the big leagues. And he says Cal Ripken Sr. just takes he's a avid chain smoker, just takes a big drag of a cigarette, blows a circle up in the air, and says, "You're going to Baltimore." So he arrives in Baltimore. Bobby Grich arrives at Memorial Stadium, and as he's walking to the clubhouse, he sees that there is a manager's office right to the side. It's cracked open just a little bit, and he peeks his head in there. He sees Earl Weaver, so he taps on the door, opens it up just slightly, and says, "Hi, my name is Bobby Grich. I'm here to report to my first day in the big leagues." And Earl Weaver looks up at him and says, "All right, what else do you have to tell me? Is there something I could help you with?" That was his interaction with the very warm and fuzzy Earl Weaver. Obviously, his reputation is not very warm and fuzzy, and it was definitely validated or confirmed with Bobby Grich's first interaction with him. Obviously, things worked out with Baltimore. He had some great years in Baltimore as a team Hall of Famer before going over to the Angels in the I believe 76 or 77. So he gets on the bus. He goes from Memorial Stadium to Washington to play the Senators. One of the unique things about that debut is that the guy on the mound for the Senators that day was a guy by the name of Casey Cox. Casey Cox went to the same high school as Bobby Grich in California. So Casey Cox was a few years older. They did not overlap time at the high school, but I do think that that's something that's very kind of unique to be making your major league debut 3,000 miles away from home and you're facing somebody who was on the same high school team as you just a few years prior. Um, but he's 0 for 3 with the walk that day. The next day, he walks into the locker room and there's a cake for him. And it says, "Welcome to Baltimore, Bobby." And I'm just going to read the rest of his story for you. Frank Robinson and all the other guys come in. He says, "Who bakes a cake for somebody who gets a walk? You didn't do anything last night. You got a walk. What's this cake all about?" He was giving me a hard time, but I said, "Come on in, guys. Let's all have a piece of cake." Pete Richard took a piece of the cake and then took a bite. He goes, "Wait a minute. That's sour cream icing. Dude, smell that." I started to smell it, and he goes, "Nah, put your nose a little bit closer." I heard somebody in the background kind of giggle. I knew right then and there that they were going to throw my face down into that cake if I got close enough. It was a total setup. My instincts picked up on it. I was able to jump away, even though he pushed me down. I think the tip of my nose hit the cake, but that was it. So he didn't get me as planned. That was the first time I'd seen that prank pulled. Anytime a rookie was called up during a season from there on out, I was in on the joke. We got a bunch of rookies after that. They would go over, smell the cake, and somebody would come from behind them and smash their face into it. It's pretty funny. That was Bobby Grich's first few days as a major leaguer. All right, so I'm going to go over to interesting story, which is Jason Bergman. Jason Bergman comes up with the 2005 Nationals. He was 11th round pick by the Montreal Expos in 2002. And a unique twist to this is that he was playing in the Florida State League in 2004, and the very end of that season, the playoffs, were actually cut short due to a hurricane. So 2005, guess where he's playing? New Orleans. And guess what impacts the end of his season in 2005? Hurricane Katrina, right? Kind of unique, 2 years in a row. But he gets called up during Hurricane Katrina. He gets the news. He's actually packing up his apartment and trying to make sure everything's safe. Because the next morning everything's just supposed to go down and get, pretty complicated, I guess you could say. So he's packing up everything, getting things safe. And he gets a call from the manager that says you need to go to the ballpark. And they're like, "Okay, well, okay. Oh, you got to get to the ballpark to pick up your stuff and then hop on a plane because you're going to Washington." So it's early enough. Chaos hasn't started too much. Chaos will start within the next hour or two, especially. But he goes to the ballpark and picks up his equipment with his girlfriend. And by that time, after he's done picking up his equipment and starts heading to the airport in New Orleans, the roads are getting slam packed, and he ends up missing his flight. He calls up the Nationals and says, "Hey, look, I can't make this flight. It leaves in like 20 minutes." And I'm like, "I'm not moving." So they're like, "Okay, well, we got a flight for you in Baton Rouge." I think it was like 2.5, 3 hours later. They're able to make it with just hardly any buffer. And now he's in a situation where he's in the car with his girlfriend, and he's like, what's going on, but I'll actually read this portion of the story in his words. He says, I'm sitting there in the car looking at my girlfriend, and I'm like, what happens if this hurricane screws up my chances of going to the major leagues? I'm in New Orleans. I can't get to the airport, and they need a guy tomorrow. They could just call a guy from Harrisburg, and he'd drive down in no time. That was running through my head. Obviously, the hurricane was a huge issue because all of our stuff was there. Her family was there, everything else. I get a call back and he says, get to Baton Rouge. We got a flight for you at 5:30. We've got 3 hours to get to Baton Rouge, and it takes 2.5 hours to get there, and I barely made the flight. Then we had a decision to make. My girlfriend was driving me to the airport, but she obviously couldn't get back to be with her family because they had closed off all access to the roads due to the hurricane. I'm sitting there at the gate and I'm like, well, how much does it cost for her to fly with me? They named their price, and I decided at that point, not just with my baseball career, but my future marriage, come with me. Let's do this together. Well, they both ended up flying to Atlanta. And that's where the Nationals were going to be on their next trip. They had one more game in DC. So they ultimately decided that she was going to remain in Atlanta and he was going to join her the next day after that one game in Washington. So he says, we both flew to Atlanta. I had a connection to DC and she stayed. The team was only going to be in DC for one day and then head to Atlanta. I said, I'll meet you in 24 hours. It was the most amazing and worst day ever. We lost all of our stuff because of the flooding, but I got to realize my dream of going to the big leagues. So he does end up actually in that first game in Washington. And he ends up relieving Mike Stanton with bases loaded in the 8th inning. He ends up giving up a hit, but he gets out of that 8th inning, and then he just thinks kind of it's done. At the time, obviously, there's no DH in the National League, but pitchers barely hit in high school. They don't really hit in college. They don't hit in the minor leagues, and then all of a sudden, Frank Robinson tells him to grab a bat and hit in the bottom of the 8th inning. He says that he was pretty actually concerned about that, but he was able to make contact. He grounded out. He didn't embarrass himself. But then he was actually asked to go out. Obviously, if he's going to bat, he's probably going to pitch the next inning too. But he ended up striking out the side in the top of the 9th. So that was Jason Bergman's debut and call-up story with the Nationals. The next guy is actually a Mariner before I end it with Oriole. And this is Ryan Rowan Smith. Now, Ryan Rowan Smith is an undrafted free agent out of Australia in 2000. He represented Australia 3 times in the World Baseball Classic and also in the 2004 Olympics. But you could tell he was an undrafted free agent in 2000. He doesn't make his major league debut until 2007. He's put in some time. And during that time, he was actually a Rule 5 pick by the Twins in 2004, but he ended up getting returned at the end of spring training. Twins decided not to keep him for 2005, and he gets returned to Mariners. And obviously, he kind of sees the rubber is meeting the road. He needs to piece things together, and he does. He has a good 2005, has a pretty good 2006. But he's still not really on the radar, obviously, as a prospect, because he's in his 7th season, 2006. But one of his coaches on his team in 2006 was an Arizona Fall League coach in 2006 as well. And they're only allowed a certain amount of spots per team, but that coach really advocated for him to get one of those spots. Things end up working out for him. He gets one of those spots, has a good Arizona Fall League, and that kind of helped turn some heads for him. Starts off really well with the Mariners AAA in 2007, and he actually gets a call up uh, in May of 2007 for a series against the Yankees. He doesn't know it's the Yankees. Obviously, he's focused on AAA, but these are his words of that first call up. He says, I got outside after I got the news and I Googled who we were playing. We were playing the Yankees. They had a bunch of lefties in that lineup. Obviously, he's a lefty specialist. He's anticipating pitching to them. They had a bunch of lefties in their lineup. Jason Giambi, Hideki Matsui, Johnny Damon, all those guys. I'm like, no freaking way. Not the Yankees. Can I face Tampa Bay on a Tuesday? I can't handle this. So he arrives in he arrives for the series against the Yankees. And one of the first things he sees in the locker room is that his jersey is actually his name on his jersey is misspelled. It's like, what do I do? Do I tell the clubby? I don't know. Eventually, he does end up telling the clubby, but he has to go out to the bullpen without a jersey. They give it to him towards the second half of the game. Everything ends up okay, but he does not get into a game that entire call up, that entire series. So these are his words. I get 3 days in the big leagues and I don't pitch. There were a good couple of weeks where I thought that was going to be my story. I got called up, never pitched. No kid's ever going to believe me. I was freaking out. I was in AAA and I'm like, don't get hurt. Be patient. I was scared I was never going to have a stat line to prove I was a Major League Baseball player. Well, he goes back to the minor leagues for a few weeks and then gets called up to the Mariners for a very interesting series. It happens to be the first series that Ken Griffey Jr. returns for while he's with the Cincinnati Reds. So I'm just going to read the rest of his story. These are just his words. I went back up, and the first night we're playing the Reds. Ken Griffey Jr. was back in town for the first time. Again, no soft landing. I'm like, man, can't we just be playing somebody that's not good and make it easy for me? They had a ceremony for Griffey, and the place was packed. We were down 16-1, and I'm like, all right, tonight's my night. This is going to happen. I start getting loose, and they said, you're going to face a lefty. Well, the three lefties in that lineup were Josh Hamilton, Adam Dunn, and Ken Griffey Jr. They were all stars. I just didn't want to face Ken Griffey Jr. my first time. I was so nervous. Well, lo and behold, the first hitter I ever faced was Ken Griffey Jr. Everybody's on their feet. They want to see him hit a home run. I come in, they're on their feet, but it's definitely not for me. I felt like I hadn't thrown a ball in months. My hand was numb, and all I was thinking was, throw strikes. Do not walk him. You have to remember something. I grew up in Australia in the 90s before the internet. We didn't have access to players, but we had access to guys like Ken Griffey Jr. because he was on The Simpsons. Here I am thinking, this guy was on the freaking Simpsons. People back home know who he is. I threw my last warm-up pitch and walked around the mound a little bit trying to look cool. I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Willie Bloomcrest was playing short. He walked over to me and said, hey, man, just enjoy it. It's another hitter. Go have some fun. It calmed me down a little. I said to myself, just throw strikes. All of a sudden, I have 2 strikes against him. I'm looking at that iconic stance, and I'm like, I'm going to try and snap off the biggest curveball of my life here. I did. He swung right over it. I swear the place booed me. My mom and stepdad had flown over from Australia, but their flight got delayed and they missed the game. When I picked them up, my mom asked, did you pitch? I said, yeah, I did. And she was a little bummed. Then I told her I faced Ken Griffey Jr. and she said, oh my God. So that's Ryan Rowland Smith's orientation to the big leagues. Last one, Oriole. I like this story. This is one of my favorites when I was putting things together. Mike Belfiore. He has 3 call-ups before he makes his major league debut with the 2013 Orioles. He's called up in May in Minnesota, overlaps Mother's Day. Whole family's there. It's going to be a great family outing. He's going to make his debut in front of his mom. Well, he doesn't. He gets sent back down after a few days. A month later, the team's in Tampa. He gets called up again. Well, after a few days, he gets sent back down. He finally gets called up in September, and he's with the team for a little bit. He's with them for a while, a few weeks. Hasn't got into a game. His parents, keep in mind, all right, every single game of every single call up. So those 2 call ups, he didn't get into a game. They're at every single game. Those few weeks that he's on the Orioles in September in 2013, they're at every single game. Well, finally, it's the last series, and they're in Camden Yards, and they're facing the Boston Red Sox. And he's like, they've got to get me into one of these games before this season is out. Well, he finally gets this call. And it ends up being his only major league game. But this is where it gets kind of interesting. I'll read his story. The moment was crazy. I saw it all evolving. I remember Dustin Pedroia being up. They said, get ready. I start throwing bullets as fast as I can. I didn't even realize who was on deck, but it was obviously David Ortiz. I just figured left on left is where I'm going to be coming in. I didn't think about it being Ortiz. I get the call to run out the gate, and from there, your adrenaline just completely takes over. Your heart's pumping, you're running to the mound, and you're saying, find a way to get out of this. Find a way to get out of this jam. I get deep into the count against Ortiz, and I gave up a home run in the front row, left center. I gave up a homer, but I also felt like I threw a good pitch too. He put a good swing on it, and I have to give him credit. In the moment, I was obviously mad. I thought, this is the worst thing that can happen. Now telling buddies and new friends, it's quite the story to tell. I remember going to the locker room, and obviously I was mad at the time. But a lot of the guys were reminding me, you're officially in the record books as a major leaguer now. Don't worry, congratulations. It was weird. I didn't have a great outing, but everyone was coming up to me, shaking my hand, and congratulating me. It was a surreal moment. I remember going out with my family after the game. My parents were at every game I got called up for, as I said before. It was the same thing. I can't believe it. You're now officially a Major League Baseball player. It definitely took a day or two for me to step back and realize what I had accomplished. It's a dream that you dream about forever, and not many people get the opportunity to achieve it. So that's Mike Belfore's experience with his single major league game, 3 call-ups for the 1 major league game, and the first batter he faces is David Ortiz, who he gives a home run to. So good story now. Probably, like he said, it wasn't a good story for him in 2013. He kind of thought of it a little bit differently a decade ago. All right, so that's the last story I'll share. I'll share a little bit about the current project that I'm working on. Working title is Next Up, and it's actually about post-playing career transitions. A lot of these players, they end their career at 25 years old, 30 years old. A lot of these guys too, there's a huge misunderstanding about, just players don't sail off into the sunset and retire 99% of the time. They have to find different careers. And, I want to give fans a greater understanding of what players face when they hang up their cleats. Because there's the misconception that everybody makes a bunch of money. Let's say if you're in the minor leagues for 7 or 8 years and you get 2 or 3 call-ups where you get 2 or 3 months worth of good salaries, average that out. That's not enough to set you for the rest of your life. That's not enough to set you for even a year afterwards. So um, I want to try and capture how they kind of found that next thing, and also help. I'm hoping that players will read it and it'll help some players with their transitions as well. And I'm interviewing players now. The collage here that I have is of Casper Wells, um, who spent, I believe it was 4 years, parts of 4 years in the big leagues. And he shared his story with me. He was the first one I interviewed for this book project, but went back to college and is now working his way up the ladder in the insurance industry, and kind of compared his work in his new job to working his way up to the major leagues, like when he was a player. And obviously, he's found fulfillment through that, and he's now has a great family. Um, so he's been able to transition, fairly well after trying to figure things out for a while, but definitely a very happy scenario now. So I guess that will close it out. I can definitely ask or answer any questions anybody may have. That's my contact information. If you Google search Zak Ford and called up, you'll be able to find it. Amazon, um, or McFarland directly, a bunch of different places. I even have some direct too. If you're interested, you could reach out to me as well, and I'll definitely make sure to get you a copy. But I guess at this time, if anybody had any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Zach, did Bergman ever wind up marrying a girlfriend he left in Atlanta?
Yep, it's his wife.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Zach, how do you get a hold of all these players, ex-players, and how did they agree to do this?
Well, it is, a fairly positive themed book and themed interview, right? So that right there is something I had a little bit going for me. My criteria was that they had major league service time. That was it, right? So obviously my pool is fairly large. I had some players with some connections, or some friends with some connections to players, and then kind of a few here would share, friends here and there. But if I really broke it down, I'd say probably at least half to two-thirds came from social media. So what I would do is I'd look at Twitter, I'd look at Facebook, and I'd do searches for MLB alum or former major leaguer, something like that. A lot of them would have that within their bio on their social media page. So after you've become friends with a few, then your Facebook and your Twitter, or X now, algorithms start popping up and providing suggestions of people you should follow, of people you should friend. And I just kind of grew the network from there. When all was said and done, I interviewed 149 players, and 109, I was able to get releases for 109 for the book. Keep in mind, these are like 15-minute to half-hour interviews, so some of them are cold calls. So, if you don't talk to somebody for 3 years and you all of a sudden reach out to them for a release, you're not always going to get that signed release back, because they're like, who the hell is this guy? But for the most part, I was pretty happy with having 109 in the book. But yeah, just they're not one particular way, but I would say the vast majority of them came from social media.
I got a follow up. Last night the Nats had a pitcher, Mitchell Parker, I think his name was, debuted, and he faced against the Dodgers. First three batters were Betts, Ohtani, and Freeman, and and he struck out Betts, and then Ohtani and Freeman both got hits off of him, and he wound up winning the game.
Mhm.
But the besides the fact that he pitched well, kind of the amusing thing to me was the TV kept taking shots of his mom in the stands, who was looked like she was going to die on every pitch. Um, you mentioned one set of parents. Were there other stories of moms and dads in stadiums and what they remember about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are quite a few stories of you know, moms, dads, coaches watching those debuts, but I would say more so than even the debuts, where the emotional point, the high emotions were when they leave that manager's locker room in double A or triple A, when they got the news and they make that call to mom at home or to dad or to grandma or to their old little league coach or high school coach. Those were actually probably the more emotional times. And some of the players too had their September, they have to have I mean, they're in a situation, even at AAA, making a huge amount of money. So your parents are still helping you out a lot. So some of these some of these folks in September, by the end of September, around the time September call-ups, mom and dad is ending the season with the U-Haul there to help pick them up and take them back home. A lot of these guys lived at home during I mean, they're not, these are, you know, players that, definitely persevered and put in their dues. But, mom and dad are there to, enjoy the very last, week or two of the season and, and help them out, get them back, back home. And then, sometimes they exit that clubhouse, and pull their, mom and dad over and say, hey, look, we're not going home. We're going to the big leagues. So yeah, there are quite a few stories like that too. And those are the ones that kind of hit me more than even the ones that, for the debuts.
One last question. What
Zach, in
position did you play?
1998 or 99, my wife and I were at a game at Fenway Park, and we sat next to the parents of a guy who had only 30 so plate appearances in the major leagues in his career, Cole Liniak, and it was his first game.
Okay.
And so that was fun, just sitting there with parents, how excited they were. He went 1 for 3 in the game, got his first hit, and so on. So you could tell how excited they were for their son. And so I followed his career beyond that, but it wasn't a very long major league career. So, but
Mhm.
still, he got
And
there. So
yeah, and there are some players too that share stories of, having a busload of people there, and then their debut goes great. In other situations, it doesn't go great, and they're like, "Oh gosh, I had so many people here to watch me." Or sometimes they have a bunch of people that show up and they don't get into a game for a while. And by the time they actually get into a game, they're maybe on the road or they don't have that group. So it's those types. It's an interesting mix of stories in the book. But what I loved were the human connections more than anything else that these players made when they were realizing that dream. When they shared those stories of what it meant to them and how they were able to share it with those people that were so inspirational and important to them along their journey.
You made me think of a story before your time or before my time, probably before all of our times. There was a ball player for the Brooklyn Dodgers. His name is Chris Hawhey, pitcher. He pitched in one game on his 18th birthday. And
Huh.
it was because Leo DeRocher promised his mother that he would get into one game that year. And it was the last game of the season, and it was his 18th birthday, and that was it. That was his career. And you ought to look him up. He lived till he was like 95 years old and could tell the
That's
story
super.
for a long time. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I love stories like that. I mean, there are some, better known players in the book. Your Bobby Gritches, your Sam McDowell's, your Jerry Royce's, some of those types of guys, Brett Boone's. But I like the Mike Belfiore stories. I like the Ryan Rowan Smith stories where somebody, struggled for a while. I mean, I have a story in there where a guy, played 12 years in the big league or the minor leagues before he finally got, just I think he had maybe about 10 games towards the end of the 2001 season. Those are the types of stories that I kind of gravitated to, and I just kind of naturally preferred.
Did you get a feeling that for the older players who made their debut earlier, like in the 60s, compared to the players who made their debut in the 90s or 2000s, that there was a difference in the attitude of the veterans across the decades? That maybe there was more resentment, and I know your book is very positive, so
Mhm.
you didn't want to. I'm sure you didn't want to talk about people who had bad experiences, but
I mean, there are some references to a little bit of that, but it would just be kind of high level, minimally. Um, and oftentimes, if players had too negative experiences, they probably would have been less inclined to share that, share some of those details. Um, but for the most part, some of these stories. They actually had, I think it's even Sam McDowell's story, where he was actually, if I remember right, I'm pretty sure it was Sam McDowell, where they didn't have enough lockers um, for the whole team after call-ups. And one of the veterans was like, hey, look, until the season's over, you could go ahead and help. You could go ahead and use half of mine. So for the most part, definitely things were more positive. There are definitely a little bit more harsher pranks and stuff like that that probably wouldn't fly nowadays. That happened in the 60s and 70s. But for the most part, everything was pretty positive as far as how they were received by their teammates.
I
Thank you,
have
Zach. Now go ahead, Bray.
I have an interesting story. It's a little bit off the topic, but it's about a famous athlete who has a tangential connection with baseball. His name is Michael Jordan, and I heard this from Mike Greenberg on ESPN Radio the other day, and it's about Jordan as a freshman at UNC. And I look at being a freshman in college is like being a rookie in a professional sport. And it's more about how coaches approach young players. Jordan in his freshman year, when he made the winning shot against Georgetown to win the NCAA tournament, was known as Mike Jordan. And the morning after their victory, the UNC team was in the airport early to get back to Chapel Hill. And Mike Jordan was seen carrying the film and the projector onto the airplane, because that was the rule with UNC and all freshmen, that they carried the film and the projector. And so, again, that's kind of talking about the hazing that rookies might go through in baseball or other sports or in basketball. So I thought it was interesting. And that was something that Dean Smith insisted on, that the freshmen show respect for the upperclassmen by doing things like that. And I'm sure there are rules like that in other, like relief pitchers carrying the ball bag out to the bullpen and things like that. So
Yeah, there were a few stories that I had where the relief pitcher on the first day has to obviously carry all the snacks out to the
yeah,
bullpen, the backpack. Obviously, the backpack is not a team backpack. The backpack is a Winnie the Pooh backpack or a Minnie Mouse backpack, something like that. They're definitely, a few of the players did that. Another thing, there was one, I can't remember what the name of the player was, but one of them, like you see these pictures sometimes of players on one of the last road trips of the season where they have the rookies dress up, uh, you know, in weird outfits. There was one of them that, he had indicated that he was dressed up as a big baby, where he had to dress up as an infant for the last road trip. So there's definitely a little bit of hazing, a little bit, but for the most part, it was all fun and games.
And Nats used to have an annual hazing event for rookies on the final road trip to the Mets. And they take the train up and make all the players dress up in whatever the senior players insisted they do. And one year they dressed up as Smurfs, and another year they dressed up as female ice skaters or male ice skaters. And they had to take the train ride all the way up to New York, all the way to the stadium dressed like that.
Yeah.
But I don't think they do that anymore for whatever reason. I think the manager changed policy. So, any other questions, guys? Yeah, anybody? Okay. Uh, thank you, Zach. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very
Good book.
much. And
Uh,
and if you have any questions or anything like that, I'll go ahead and I'll put the URL. I mean, you can find it if you just do a Google search. But here is on that website that I just put into the chat, many different ordering options that you can use to get the book, and you could obviously get it from me directly too if you wanted to do that.
By the way, Zach, what position did you play as a little leaguer?
I played any position in that they would allow me to play, which is typically right field because I sucked. But I would typically when I was younger, it was right field, and then when I got a little less terrible, which I was still terrible in that range, I usually would do like shortstop or third base.
All
And
right.
my hero at the time in the early, after a few years was Matt Williams. So Matt Williams was third baseman for the Giants. So I had, the illusion that I was Matt Williams, even though I was terrible. I wasn't a vacuum. I was not a vacuum at third base. I was like a reverse magnet, like the repels balls almost.
Hockey goaltender. Okay. Well, thank you again.
Thank you very
Our
much for
next,
having me. I appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. We're gonna
You have
let,
a great night, everybody.
thank
Take
you,
care.
Zach.
Thank you.
Zach, Eli, I'm gonna make you the come on, make you a co-host if it's cooperating with me. There you go. Eli is a student at William and Mary, about to graduate. I think, as I recall, you're going on to graduate school too in mathematics. Has done a lot of internships. You're going with Berkeley Research Group this summer, as I recall. But more importantly, from our standpoint, he has been participating for 3 years at the SABR convention in Phoenix for analytics, and they have a program there to invite college teams or high school teams to compete in what's called Diamond Dollars, where they're asked to tackle an operational issue, not a pure analytical issue. But I think you're going to tell us more about this because you've done this for 3 years. But Eli, please tell us first of all, what was your position, and then you can tell us all about the analytics.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for the quick introduction. So yeah, my name's Eli. I'm a junior at William Mary. And so my baseball career ended in Little League as well. I grew up playing baseball and soccer, so I was a baseball player known as being the soccer guy. So I played second base mostly. But I was known as the guy that would like slap hit down the third base line and just run it out and then steal a couple bases. So that was mostly my role in the team. Sadly, pitch running wasn't a big thing in Little League, or else I maybe would have been a good player. But yeah, mainly second base. But yeah, the Phoenix competition was great experience all 3 times. It's all very analytic based, so a little bit of a switch up from the more emotional, like call up stories. We've had a couple different cases over the past 3 competitions. The first 2 I did in high school, actually, now through 4 and 5 years ago. The first one was about how do you value pitchers the third time through an order, like what makes a pitcher better when they get later into a game, and how do you like teach pitchers to be good at those skills. The next one was how do you determine how good a pitcher was in a game? So they wanted to come up with a game score that evaluated how good a pitcher was. And so this year it's how do you value put a value to a foul ball, and whether that's positive for a pitcher or a batter. So all these are very broad, so everyone takes their own approach to them. But the basic premise is a week before the competition, Vince Gennaro, head of SABR, gives us a prompt to start working on. We have a week to work on it, fly out to Phoenix and present it in front of MLB executives. I know there are a lot from a lot of different teams, from some of the analytics companies that work with baseball teams. And we present there for half an hour and they give us questions. So yeah, this year's it was on foul balls. And how exactly do you put a value to a foul ball? And so I'm going to share my screen, just a quick. I cut down our slides a little bit and it's very nitty gritty. But can you guys see the slideshow? All right, awesome. So I'll kind of try to slow it down, take a step back. But the way we define foul ball value is the predicted runs expected. So the runs expected is used a lot in the analytics community, and it just means you're in a certain game situation with runners on, outs, and a count, and you have a certain amount of runs you can expect till the end of the inning. And so we based our idea on how to value a foul ball as this difference between our predicted and the actual run expectancy. So this is me and my group's take on it, and I'll go through these slides pretty slowly, but our idea is based on the fact that given any event that happens in baseball, whether a ball, a strike, a foul, a single, double, triple, you have a beginning state with the bases, the out, and the count, and you move to a new state given this event happens. And so what our whole presentation was about is how do you predict what event should happen, and what states would happen based on this beginning state. And so the way we value what a state is through the runs expected, like I was talking about before. And so we added this fun little graphic at the bottom that just shows kind of what we're basing it off of. So this is on the left, all the different combinations of runners on. On the top, it's all different combinations of count. And then this is just the box for 2 outs. But we created this using the 2022 season in every single situation, how many runs were scored after that point to the end of the inning. So we basically assigned that event has the value that changes the runs that you expect from a team. So we take this initial idea, and please stop me if you guys have any questions, because I know I'll be going quickly. But we take this idea of having this beginning state of a pitch where a foul ball happened. We have these given characteristics. We have the speed, the zone it went in, and the spin. And what our model did was we were able to predict what events we thought would happen. So just given this pitch, which happened to be a fastball out of the zone, we predicted that it would be a ball 84% of the time. And so given that prediction, we were able to assign a value to that foul ball as we predicted it should have been a walk, and in actuality, it ended up being a foul ball. So that kind of runs quickly through the idea of our model. And then that last slide, we had that foul ball. And this slide, we predict there actually should have been a walk given the situation. So this was kind of the main idea of our model we presented. And it's in taking that beginning state where a foul ball happened, and determining the cost or benefit of the foul ball based on the pitch that came in and comparing it to the actual game state that happened as a result. So basically how our model worked is we took a pitch that came in that was fouled off. We looked at the speed. It was the zone it came in the strike zone, as well as how much it was spinning. And we predicted what events we thought would occur, single, double, out. And we were able to come up with predicted runs expected from that. And we were then able to compare that run expectancy to what actually happened with the foul ball to get our foul ball value. And so that was just our way of defining, and it actually ended up being very similar to a lot of the other teams. I'll kind of speed along because this is our example again on the same
Hang on, Eli.
chart.
You said it's, yeah, quick interject. You said other teams use the same approach.
Yeah, there are a lot of teams that use the runs expected approach in that
Okay.
they wanted to look at the number of runs to the end of the inning, given a foul ball's current state. So a lot of teams that approaches.
Who didn't? Who took a different approach, and what was it?
We are actually only, the way the competition works is after you present, you can only, like, you can't view any presentations before you go, and then you can start going to them after. So the only two we saw out of the 20 that were there happened to have the same approach. So that was just our small sample, but we assume a lot of others also had the same approach if all three we knew about all did runs expected. But yeah, so jumping back in, it's just our example on this spreadsheet. And this is kind of the whole entire model that we came up with. I'll go piece by piece, but yeah, please stop me if you guys have any questions. It was very what we started to learn, I'll kind of jump back. What we started to learn after doing this competition before is that you really need to aim kind of high. And a lot of these judges already have such a strong baseball and analytics and statistics background that you don't want to undershoot them. And like you want to bring the level of analytics knowledge up, and that you need to like basically be talking to them. So we had a lot of statistical analysis in here that I cut out to try to have a better approach. But basically the way our model works is we first found the runs expected for all 288 different combinations of outs, count, and runners on, and yeah, found the runs that'd be expected as a result of that. We then took all the possible types of pitches and found the probabilities of each event to occur. And then from there on, we found the resulting end states, so the new game situations that happened from each state. And then we could find those run expectancies on those new game situations and take that predicted, subtract it from the actual to find our foul ball value. So just kind of running through each of those pieces. The first one is that run expectancy matrix I showed earlier. And this is just like, this is the baseball analytics dream chart here. I've found this all over baseball analytics Twitter and baseball analytics Reddit. And that is all over and used a lot across the industry. And this is just derived, you take any game state and find the runs. Moving on, we then had to determine how we're going to break out each pitch. And so we did that through a number of buckets. The speed and spin were continuous variables. So we just broke them out in standard deviations and got different splits we'd be able to then use. And then the zones is the strike zones used by MLB, and it's in all their data. They have these zones, which just tells you where the pitch went. There were had a number of different characteristics we could have chosen through the pitch, but we just found these three to be the best ones to actually predict what a pitch did. Next, I've been talking a lot about like the probabilities of different events. And so here's just some examples of what that looked like. So on the left, we have the pitch characteristics with the speed, spin, and zone. And then on the right, we have the probabilities we derived given those different pitches. So if you look at the top one, it was in zone 14, which means out of the zone. And given that pitch, we predicted 65% of the time it would be a ball. So we're able to use statistics like this to be able to predict what we think would happen from pitch. And we're able to create a chain that predicts what our outcome will be. So at the chart at the top, this is another one we showed where we have this game situation that we start in, that a foul ball happened in, and we're just able to determine how many runs would be scored if an event happened. So I'll just look at the example at the top. There's a 1-2 count with runners on the corners. If a single happened, that would score the runner on third. So you get the 1 run, and then it would leave runners on first and second with no outs, which is 1.462 runs. So you just add that 1 run that would score with the 1.62 to get the 2.462. So we are able to use these different events and find the runs expected for each game situation. So we then take, as shown by the bottom right of this, we take our runs expected and we multiply them by the probability of each event to occur. So kind of taking that back to get one final number for the runs expected. And then this is kind of where our model kind of finally comes to fruition. We then take the actual runs expected after the foul ball and subtract the predicted runs expected through our model. And if we see this being a positive number, this is a positive for the batter, because this means that as a result of the foul ball, they had more runs to be expected in the inning than we would have predicted to be likely. And if the opposite happened, if it's a negative run expectancy, it's a positive for the pitcher, because our model predicted there should have been a higher runs expected than there actually were. So I have one final slide about our model, and kind of like the cool part of it is we were able to break it down by hitters in 2023 and see who's the best at fouling off balls and who's the worst. And so the graph on the left just provides a fun little look at every single foul ball and where it fell in our metric. And kind of one of the cool things that adds up with intuition is our average number of runs for a foul ball is negative, which we would expect, because on average, a foul ball adds a strike to the count unless there's 2 strikes. So we're glad it ended up with that, because it follows intuition that a foul ball is a positive for the pitcher in most cases. And so kind of just for fun, we pulled who is the best and worst on our metric. And so there's a lot of familiar names from current baseball. Mookie Betts, Justin Turner, and Corey Seager are among the best in this foul ball metric. And some of the worst included guys known to strike out like Javier Baez, Jose Ramirez, and Jeff McNeil, and just allowed us kind of show the strength of our model. So that wraps up my presentation. I was now just talk about the competition as a whole and kind of the conference as well. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions or want me to go back over the slides? I know I went super fast and talk quick, so let me know if you guys have any questions on that.
Let your questions after you get through.
Okay. Yeah, sounds great. All right, so stop the share. And yeah, so just talking about the conference in general, it was really cool, because I'd say there's probably about 60 guys from MLB clubs in their like MLB polos that you're able to go around and talk to. Super smart guys that like came from everywhere, like started their careers in finance and consulting and started working for major league clubs. So it was great to hear from all of them. And that's kind of my dream and aspiration, is to work for an MLB club one day. So that's my main motivation for going to a conference like this. We ended up not winning the competition. Actually, a team from Syracuse University ended up winning it all. and they're also in our group. So they beat us out in the group from the Masters of Sports at Syracuse. But it was a really good learning experience. I've had a couple interviews with major league teams trying to get a position somewhere. But yeah, that's really the dream and kind of where I went, why I went. And a lot of the panels were also very cool. They did a lot of analytics panels from MLB guys from MLB Network and former MLB players. And Brian Kenny from LB Network, one of the main guys from there, did a couple talks about analytics and how it's changed the game. So it's really cool to hear from them and really get a piece of these guys' mind to see where maybe my career would go. So yeah, that wraps up my presentation. I appreciate all you guys listening, and I know I pushed through that fast, but I'd love to take some questions if you guys have any.
You said you started going in high school. I guess it was a high school team. Um, uh, how did that get started? Or how did this idea of doing the analytics and going to the conferences and making this perhaps a career?
Yeah, so funny enough, my dad is actually was a teacher at my high school, also a very big baseball fan. And when you're senior at my high school, you're able to take a seminar, which is in any course the teachers want to teach in. And my dad started teaching a baseball analytics senior class. And so whole class around baseball analytics, it was right up my alley. And he found about the competition a couple of years before when he made the class. And so every year since, I'm from Richmond actually, so our team from Richmond would go to Phoenix. And it's a really cool experience, and we're the only high school to compete, and I think my high school is still the only high school that's ever competed in the competition. So it was a very unique experience, and yeah, I'm a huge sports fan. I live, breathe sports, and baseball just felt like a natural transition. And I don't know, I've always enjoyed baseball, and the analytics in baseball are just something that's really easy to approach compared to other sports.
You
So that
go to
was kind
Maggie
of,
Walker?
yeah, I went to Maggie Walker in Richmond.
Yeah, I'm from Richmond too, and figured that might be where you went. What are you majoring in at William and Mary, or did I miss that?
Yeah, so I'm majoring in business analytics now and math. And so I'll be graduating this semester and doing a master's before I start off in the real world. But yeah,
Hopefully it's in baseball.
yeah, I sure hope so. It sure is competitive. I actually had a call with an analytics guy in the Red Sox about a week ago, and he was talking about how competitive it is now because, I mean, it's everyone's dream to work in baseball. But I think the last Red Sox analytics job had 8,000 applicants. So I think there's 5 roles and 8,000 applicants. So it's definitely going to be a push, but yeah, that's the goal.
Good for you.
William and Mary's baseball team is doing above average this year. Is there any interest by the club for analytics from you, or do they use it?
Yeah, there's actually a Twitter page run by one of the guys, former players of the team, and one of the analytics guys that I know. They use a lot of analytics with the team, and yeah, they've been really good this year. So with my master's next year, that's who I'm going to try to work with the baseball team, and also try to work with the football team too, because their seasons aren't overlapped at all. So try to work with as many teams as I can.
Eli, has the result of any of these competitions over the last few years resulted in a conclusion that baseball as an institution has been able to use? In other words, is a question that you've been asked to address something that baseball is wondering about and thinks may have value, or is it something that they just kind of thought up as a nice, competition?
Yeah, so most of them, it'll try to give some value to the teams. Like that's why so many teams send analytics guys, is because they are kind of interested in the answer a lot of us have. And actually the most interesting one was in 2021, the year after I did it, and it was about umpires and like how do you correct all the missed balls and strikes calls. And actually one of their answers on there was to add the challenge system.
Mm.
That's now in the minors and might be coming up to the majors, where I don't know if any of you guys have seen some of the articles, but the Pirates' big prospect, Paul Skeens, had a big couple plays the other day where I think he used in back-to-back at bats, where he had like a 1-2 count in both of them and threw a pitch right off the strike zone. It was called a ball, and he just tapped his head for a challenge. They challenged it, looked at the replay, called both a strike, and he got 2 strikeouts out of it.
Mm.
So it's kind of a cool repercussion out of the conference, the kind of strike challenge rule.
So every catcher or pitcher will tell you that they know an umpire's tendency, their
Mm.
favorite zone, or one where you can cheat. Has analytics compiled this data and used it for the advantage of well, perhaps even for the umpires?
Yeah, there's a lot of analytics on umpires, and actually there's a whole website called Scorecards, which has the all like the numbers on it, and you can pull charts for all the umpires and look at where their strike zone is versus the actual strike zone. So yeah, there's a lot of analytics, and I bet teams are using it to try to figure out, like, I bet when you're pitching against Angel Hernandez, you get a little bit more leeway than some of the other umpires.
I went to the SABR conference last year, and the Minnesota Twins technology director, gave a little talk, and he said things that completely dumbfounded me. He says every player's got 5 cameras pointed at strategic points of the body, and every ball has got 14 cameras on it. And there's so much data in a week that equated to the entire data that they had in all 20th century baseball as a result. And the question is how to use all that data that comes in. He wasn't really in the analysis part. He was in the data management and collection and distribution. But one of the things he says is they don't do advanced scouting anymore. They just use the shared MLB data, and they can figure out where the guy is weak zones, or he's hitching, or whatever the tendencies are of the pitchers, and perhaps even tipping pitches by doing that. But I was just truly amazed on the amount of data that comes in and the opportunities to use that. I don't know. I guess it's not public domain. Otherwise, you'd see a lot more uses of that by amateurs like us. Are you
Yeah.
privy or aware of some of that stuff?
Yeah, there's a lot of data on each pitch. We use Baseball Savant as kind of our research for getting that data. But when we were pulling our data for our model, I think there's about 86 columns for each individual pitch. There are 86 variables for each pitch. And I think like the first 15 of those were like what date, what teams. But for the individual pitch, there was like 70, and probably 30 of those didn't exist 20 years ago. So yeah, they're public domain, and it's crazy how much they're able to pull. Actually, from one of the panels, they were talking about this and how they take in so much data now, there's no way to actually look at all of it. And so they're talking about that's how they'll start to use artificial intelligence, is to be able to look at all that data, and it'll be able to generate actual insights. And one of the cool stats I heard is actually soccer is the worst with it. Soccer, they only use 13% of the data they collect, they actually use. And they said baseball was somewhere in the 30% to 40% range, but still not like they're not using all the data they have, because there's just no way, like you're saying, they're creating so much data now, it's hard to even get close to using all of it.
Anybody else?
And the question is, how useful is all of the data, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's why they hire people like me to try to figure out what to do with all that data. So,
What I was most interested in your presentation, but you didn't really kind of go specifically into that, was foul balls with 2 strikes, and
Mhm.
how often hitters fend off third strikes by hitting foul balls. And that would be, to me, a really interesting, very interesting thing to pursue also.
Yeah, definitely. I think that would be a good way to break that off. I wish we had more time than a week to work on this because allow us to look at fun stuff like that. But yeah, yeah, that's one of the things we're interested in too, and hoped our model will be able to look at better.
Yeah, Carl, it's interesting you bring that up because I was thinking, would this be a way to identify people who are skillful at fouling off pitches that they can't drive with 2 strikes to prolong their at bat? And is that a skill you can teach young hitters? And so I don't know. I mean, if you listen to the color men on TV, batters have more control over hitting foul balls than I think they really do. But anyway, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be really interesting to look at and kind of going off of like what you're talking about with like teaching prospects how to hit off with 2 strikes and keep the count going. They talked a lot about how just the prospect system has changed in that they're just going for guys who can hit the ball really hard, who can hit homers. Like that stuff isn't looked at as much nearly even like 15 years ago. So it's much more focused on just how hard are you hitting the ball when you hit
Right.
it, as much as those like kind of tangible attributes that batters can have.
So Eli, it looks like what you really need to get into right now, though, is the pitcher's elbows and what's going on with injuries. Yeah.
Yeah, seriously, tell them to stop throwing so hard.
That's right.
That's like everyone's answer.
Have you looked at minor league when you're looking at jobs or internships and stuff? Do you look at minor league teams like the Flying Squirrels and over there in your neck of the woods and the Eastern Shore and all?
Yeah, I try to, but it's a little harder because all of like the minor leagues analytics guys are run up through the club. So it's run up through the major league team. And so they hire the guys that then look at them all the minor league systems. So I don't think the Flying Squirrels even technically have an analytics person on staff because it's all the Giants that control all that. So I mean I'd love to look at minor league data like that, but I'd have to go through the big league team.
How did you create the club at William and Mary, or this group of guys that are doing analytics for baseball?
Yeah, so I brought a couple of my friends along that aren't necessarily the biggest baseball fans. This is just a group I put together to kind of put a fight there in Phoenix. But these are math guys. 2 are math guys, one's a computer science major, and one's a finance major, just kind of trying to encompass all of them. And I was kind of the baseball guy. But yeah, it's just a group we pulled together. And one of the guys went to high school with me at Matthew Walker. So he was on one of my teams back in high school.
So your analytic group, do they do other problems for other sports or non-sports? I don't know, symphony orchestras, do they have analytics or something like that too?
Yeah, so I do a lot of analytics with basketball too, especially around March Madness, and so I'll get some help from those guys with all the math related to that. And one of my good friends does a lot of work with like finance and finance with baseball. So he's done some cool work with baseball salaries and he likes looking into the Otani contract. I don't know who didn't because I don't think that kind of money really exists in I think 2040 or whenever the contract goes out to. But yeah, a lot of interest in other sports and in baseball finance.
It's my understanding that the agents also employ a lot of analytics, math people. And some people I knew went into baseball to become agents. They started out in the analysis department where they move up becoming the agent for the guy who just made it to the majors, the people that Zach talked to. But no, besides finances, are there any other, I picked symphony orchestra because it's off the wall, or analytics for agriculture or um, zoo management or something like that.
Yeah, so I actually this past summer I worked at CarMax in Richmond. So that was a cool switch up where I was doing analytics on car selling data. And so kind of off the path of sports. But a kind of cool, interesting, different take. And this summer, at my internship, I'm going to be doing more like litigation and economics analytics. So yeah, a little different, but kind of same realm of work.
I guess my question is for all of you guys who've been to the SABR analytics conference and all. I know there's a question about who should own this data, and do the players own the data collected? At least in terms of looking at how our contracts are negotiated and all. And I wonder if there's any discussion that you've heard, Eli, or any of you guys from the analytics conferences.
Yeah, I went to the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference last year in Boston. And they talked a lot about that and how like players, like you're saying, negotiating for contracts, they don't want you to take all their data in like at the current moment because they don't want to lose out on money if you find out they have this injury or this deficiency. And so, yeah, a lot about like owning your own data and choosing when to send it to teams and when not to. So yeah, it's definitely very interesting.
Well, I was just reflecting that in my youth, if I had all this data and it was briefed to me, I still couldn't hit a curveball. And your ability to hand-eye coordination is still more important. Hey, it's getting on 9:30, at least on the East Coast where everybody is, I believe. Anybody else have any last questions? Eli, great job. Thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Eli.
Thank you guys.
Good luck. Good luck in your future.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you guys for listening. It was great to talk to you all.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. We do this once a month here, and if you don't know, you can join any Zoom in any location for any topic. So, everybody, see you next month.
See you next month.
So
Good
long.
night,
Night,
Thanks,
everybody.
Paul.
Night.
Bye, everyone.